Well, welcome. In today's session, I intend to speak about the relationship marketplace. It occurred to me in the prior session that I had spoken about several topics. In the past, I had defined my target audience and the groups that I was trying to communicate with. But one of the things I had not done is I had not specifically explained that the relationship marketplace is not one place. There are different marketplaces. And so in today's session, what I hope to do will be to expand on the concept of a marketplace with the idea that perhaps it will provide more clarity on how both men and women should approach the dating or the relationship scene in order to achieve what they want. But let me begin with my own experience of a marketplace. And for many people, I think many people this will be different. For a few, they might relate to this concept. Now, I grew up in a relatively small town, but I remember very clearly going with my parents to the market. It seemed like a very big place, but it wasn't. It was really the intersection of a number of streets, and there were hundreds of people. There were buyers and there were sellers, people who had goods and services, primarily goods, perishable goods to sell. Now, I would go with my parents, and we will walk around the market, sometimes for hours. We would arrive, and we would simply walk, and I observed my parents just walking past different kiosks and stalls and stores, but not making any purchase. And after about an hour, 2 hours sometimes, they would then very specifically go to the store that they wanted to purchase from, and then the process of negotiation or haggling began. And it was very useful as a young boy to observe the exchange. I observed and I noted that in most cases, a lot of the consensus that was reached between both parties required some level of tact, good communication, some bit of banter, cajoling, playfulness, and having sometimes the audacity. I won't even use the courage as the word. I use the audacity to make what would have been considered as a ridiculous proposal or offer for the product or for the goods. And in almost all cases, there was a back and forth taking place. And finally, sometimes there was no consensus, there was no agreement. We walked away. But most of the time, an agreement was reached, money was exchanged, we got the product or the goods, we went home. And I remember once particularly speaking to my parents and saying, well, I don't understand how and why we have traveled so far. We've gone past a number of smaller supermarkets. We could have gone into one of those markets and bought the same products. Why did we have to come all this way and spend all this time? And I was told at the time, the reason was we were looking to get the best value for our money. And that if you wanted the best value for money, you needed a place where you could ensure that you had a willing buyer and a willing seller in the same location, but willing to negotiate and arrive at a price. I was told if we bought the products in the supermarkets, we would be paying a premium. Now, you might be thinking, what does this have to do with relationships? Well, one of the things I learned from that experience was observing how my parents negotiated and recognizing that in life we don't get what we deserve. We don't get what we want. We get what we have the courage to ask for. And more importantly, we get what we have the courage to negotiate for. So, in the same way, when we come to relationships, a lot of the relationships that have the most significant meaning in our lives are those that have come from the willingness to ask, to be audacious, to negotiate, to communicate, to think about what the other person wants, and sometimes to be outright selfish and put yourself first. Make that offer. Some will, some won't. So what? Next. The point being, I learned as a young boy that communication and the art of negotiation was something that was necessary, irrespective of where you find yourself in life. Now, with that said, the relationship marketplace is not the same as a traditional marketplace. There are several marketplaces in the world. Some are physical, some are virtual. And what I am referring to in today's session is a marketplace that is distributed. It's not in one location. If you go out to a bar, that is a marketplace. If you are on the road, that is a marketplace. If you walk into a supermarket, that is a marketplace. If you go on Tinder or Bumble, that is a marketplace. A marketplace of willing participants. Some are not available, some are available and ready to mingle. And those who are willing to put themselves out there face the risk of being rejected, face the risk of actually having their feelings, emotions, perhaps not acknowledged, are usually the ones who win. Those who believe in, hiding in the corner are those who never really get to live life. Now, the mistake I made as a young boy when I was growing up was not recognizing that we do not have one marketplace for relationships. In my opinion, there are two marketplaces with regards to relationships. The first is what I call the dating marketplace, and the second is the marriage marketplace. Both are not one and the same. There are people who have decided that they have no interest in getting married, in cohabiting with another person, in moving in or having someone move into their place. There are people who want to be unmarried for the rest of their lives, and therefore the dating marketplace is where they go. They might play the dating marketplace slightly different as they age, but generally they stick to the dating marketplace. Now, my experience has been for young men, we conflate both. We believe both are one and the same, but they are not. Now, the best way to think about how to approach the marketplace is to understand what tools do you need in order to get what you want in either marketplace. In a traditional marketplace, I would go with money, I would go with kind words, I would go with the gift of gab, I would go with the ability to negotiate, and most importantly, I would go with the self-assurance that is necessary for me to walk away from a negotiation if I felt that the terms were not good enough. In the dating marketplace, it's important to recognize that it's a zero-sum game. In many ways, it is best conceptualized by the statement, all is fair in love and war. The dating marketplace is war, and that simply means the winner takes most. It's not equally distributed. To describe it very, very bluntly, men are looking to play the game whereby they recognize that women want resources. That resources or what the man provides can come in several derivatives. It could be power, money, influence, fame, wealth. Women generally want our resources. Our job as men is to give out as little as possible of our resources, but to gain as much as possible of what we want from women. It's very simple. Women, on the other hand, play the opposite game. Women have what we men want, which is beauty, attractiveness, youth, and most importantly, their bodies. And they have to give out as little as possible and to gain from the man as much as possible. Hence the concept of a zero-sum approach. Whoever plays that game the most wins. But more importantly, in the dating marketplace, whoever withholds love the most usually has the upper hand. You generally win. Whoever treats the other person, I wouldn't use the word poorly, but treats the other person in perhaps not a very flattering way, usually wins. Now, the second marketplace, which is the dating marketplace, the marriage marketplace, is a different landscape. I think about that landscape in using the concept of what I call the silver rule, which simply says, do not do unto others as you would hope that they would not do unto you. It's the opposite of the golden rule. In this marketplace, the concept is what I believe to be the fair exchange principle, which has to do with treating others in a respectable way. It's not a zero sum, it's a positive sum, whereby you can get what you want and the other person can get what they want. Now, to put it in a very simple way, the dating marketplace is transactional. The marriage marketplace is relational. Now, very, very simple way to think about those two marketplaces. The people who make the mistake of applying a different tool set to one of the other marketplaces usually lose. Now, you've heard before that to a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that works if you have a nail and you're banging the nail into a piece of wood. But if you use the same hammer on glass, you might actually injure yourself. Therefore, those who apply the transactional approach to marriage lose, because the right tool should be relationship. Similarly, those who apply the relationship tool to dating, especially men, usually lose. The reason being, the right approach should be transactional. Now, what this simply means is, from my perspective, for men, you should approach the dating marketplace in a different way to the marriage marketplace. Now, when I speak, normally I talk to three different groups. I call the first my preschool group, which is 18 years and below. The second group is what I call my undergraduate group, which is 18 to 35. And the postgraduate is from 35 and above. Usually I speak to the middle group, 18 to 35, primarily because I think this is where most young men can make the most difference in what they will have as a life, whether that life is a life of fulfilled dreams or a life of regrets. So I tend to focus on the second group, and therefore, for the second group, my approach and my recommendation to you is recognizing that women want your resources, and it's your responsibility to keep that resources in your pockets, to spend as little as possible. The principle of parsimony is the approach to adopt for men between 18 and even before 18, all the way up to 35. Now, from 35, you are a grown man. you can make a decision for yourself as to how you want to, whether you want to transition from the relationship marketplace to the marriage marketplace. Now, for some people, perhaps you do not want to be married, but you might want to have a significant other. You might want to move in with someone. You might want to cohabit with another. Therefore, that is still the same marketplace as the marriage marketplace. The principle of parsimony simply applies, in my opinion, primarily to the dating marketplace. And I have many reasons for that. The younger you are as a man, the less you have of what women generally want, which is resources. The older you get, the more you have what most women want, which is resources. And the reason is simply because you've had the time, the opportunity to develop your human capital, which would enable you generate financial capital, build wealth, develop a network, and have the foundation to provide for a family. So as you age, you have more of what women want in a man. The younger you are, the less of the resources that women want you have, except you've inherited wealth from your parents. Now, for women, as a woman ages, she has less of what most men want, which is youth, beauty, attractiveness, and sex. So a woman has more value the younger she is, and less value the older she gets. The reverse is the case for men. And what that means is that in the dating marketplace, usually women, especially women who are younger, they hold more of the power, except where they are dating men who have accomplished something in their lives, men from 35 and above. And what that simply means is that the zero-sum game of dating becomes very interesting because of what I call the balance of power. A man who is 22 has less of what a woman wants who is 22, whereas a woman who is 22 has more of the power. She's at the peak of her beauty, she's still at the peak of her youth, she's at the peak of her sexual marketplace. In terms of reproductive value, she's at the peak of her reproductive value. So she has much of what most men want. She is desirable to men across the broad spectrum. Men who are 18 all the way up to 60, 65, even 70 would find a 22-year-old attractive. They may not want to date her, but they find it desirable. This brings an interesting dilemma, which is, for men, recognizing the limitations that is set before you. How do you play the game of dating, relationships, and marriage? Now, I usually like to use the analogy of cars when I talk about women. Men and cars have always had some unique relationship. Generally, men have cars, and the most attractive cars that they can afford to buy. Now, I know there have been changes in the credit system over the last 40 years, but traditionally, you bought a car because you had the cash to buy the car. You didn't buy a car on credit. You didn't buy a car by putting down a token deposit and paying every month. That was something that was developed in the last 40 years. Has become wide scale, but generally it was the case that in order for you to drive an Aston Martin, say a DB11, you needed to have money. And generally the principle was, you don't buy an Aston Martin DB11 except you can afford to buy 3 of those cars. It was a principle of 3, the rule of 3. You don't buy a car except you can afford to buy the car 3 times over. If you can afford just one, then you look for a cheaper car. So generally men own cars or drive cars that they can afford. The same principle applies to women. Men generally, in the dating marketplace, not the marriage marketplace, in the dating marketplace, men want to date the most attractive women available. But generally, we can only date the kind and the caliber of women on a scale of 0 to 10 that we have the resources to afford. Now, this varies, certainly, across continents. In the United States, it's purely a transactional arrangement. In parts of Canada, you have some element of that. It's less so in the UK and in parts of Europe, where you can have a very, very, very attractive woman who is a 9 or a 10 dating a very average man. Because women generally in this part of the world think slightly differently. It's not always financially motivated. However, globalization has created a scenario whereby what we find, and thanks to the feminist movement, and also thanks to equality, women generally want to date men who have more resources than they do. A woman will date horizontally and upwards in terms of the social hierarchy. A man will date horizontally and downwards. So even in the developed West, in Europe and the UK, we are starting to see that most women want a man who is at least making the same as she is, but preferably more. The principle of hypergamy. Now what this simply means is, for boys who are between 18, forgive me for saying that, for men who are between 18 and 35, the approach to dating should be very different. It's not what we did in the past. Apply the same principles to cars. Today, we have people who are driving very, very beautiful cars, but they do not own the cars. They rent the cars, they lease the cars. And in the same way, if you're between 18 and 35, you should not be having a car under your ownership. You should rent when you can. Think about the concept of transportation as a service. I can walk out of my house this evening and I can get an Uber that will take me to a location, and once I'm done I can have an Uber bring me back to my home. Or if I want to, I can walk down the street, I can pick a Zipcar and I can rent it for an hour, 2 hours, and I can return it back to the same location. So I can have the benefits of ownership, but not the responsibility of ownership on a daily basis. Recognizing that most cars in the UK have a utilization of about 5%. That simply means that for most people, especially people who live in London, the cars are usually parked on your driveway. They're parked on the streets. They're parked in the garages between Monday and Friday. And seldom do we use those cars, except maybe on the weekend. The utilization for most cars is 5%. That 5% corresponds very nicely with what I have recommended to young men as the maximum amount of time they should allocate to relationships. Now, I have said between 18 and 35, there are some tenets that most young men should follow. Perhaps I'll share some of those at the end of today's session. But the overarching theme of this tenets is 95% of your time as a young man should be focused on achieving your dreams, pursuing that goal you have, that vision you have, striving to discover your purpose and manifest that purpose, aspiring to be the best version that you can be, pursuing financial freedom, trying to build wealth, dedicating yourself to mastery in an area of either gift, talent, education, or passion. And 5% of your time, therefore, is all you have to allocate to relationships. This simply means that you can't afford to own a car. In this case, I'm not referring to a car in its actual definition. I'm talking about women. So you should rent rather than buy cars. And in the same way, in the relationship marketplace, you should rent rather than buy. This brings a very, very interesting, for young men between 18 and 35, a very interesting, unique conundrum. Now we know that the younger you are, the less you have of what women generally want. The older you are, the more you have of what women want. The other way around, women at the younger age have a lot more of what we want as men. But as they age, they have less of what we want. So at 22, you certainly want a woman who is 22, the same age. But at 35, if you are 35, you do not want to have a woman who is 35, all things considered. You would want something that is younger, that is hotter, more attractive. In many ways, it's the same as a rental car. You keep trading up. You can choose the car you want to drive, and every year you can substitute that car for a newer model. Now, this brings an interesting scenario for young men, because I find that young men usually struggle with how to play the game of dating, recognizing that they have limited resources at the start of the game, but they will have a lot more resources at the end or towards the end of the game. However, if they play the game actively, they sabotage the possibility of having those resources, because relationships are usually dream killers. Women generally, in a relationship, if you have one, will kill your dream. Not because they want to. It's simply because a dream is something that is so fragile, something that is so precious. It needs time to grow. It needs the right environment. It needs the right temperature. It needs the right amount of nurturing in order for it to gestate and for it to be birthed and to come into the world. Most people give up their dreams. And let me rephrase that. Most dreams are aborted. Simply because most young men do not have the strength of character to say, no, my dreams come before you do. I like you, but I love my dreams more than I like you. And therefore, you come third place. My dreams come first, I come second, you might come third. And even if you come third, I only have 5% of my time. Now, just to put it in context, 5% of your time every week as a young man is 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours. Now, I've done some sessions where I explain how that comes about. I've used the waking day, 8 hours to sleep, that leaves you 16 hours generally as part of your waking day, and I've made allowances for you going to work, etc. So 2.5 hours is all you have every week. If you take into account 8 hours of sleep, 10 hours for traveling to work and back, preparing for work and working, the rest of your time, 5% of that is all you dedicate to women. This would simply mean that 2.5 hours cannot be sufficient for a meaningful, loving, committed relationship. Therefore, my recommendation has always been, you should not be in a relationship between 18 and 35. Now, I will take some time at the end and go through the tenets, and I try to explain this in more detail. But what this means is that young men between 30 18 years and 35 have very limited tools, but they still have a need that has to be met, a sexual need. This is not an amoral, rather, this is an amoral conversation. I'm not talking about morality. It's not my place to tell you that you should be a virgin until 35. It's not my place to tell you that this is good and this is bad. It's yours to decide. You have needs, those needs have to be met. So between 18 years and 35 for the man, my recommendation is simply, you don't need a relationship, you need booty calls, and you need a number of them. You need a list of people who can satisfy that need you have, and that has to be rotated regularly, where every few weeks, every few months, every year, that whole number has to be replaced. In many ways, you trade up. Now this leaves an interesting dilemma. How does the young man meet his need, recognizing he has no resources and recognizing that he has to play the game or the principle of parsimony? Here is a recommendation. 18 to 35 is 18 years. 18 very important years. However, at 18 you go to college. Most people do. But 18 is the first stage of when you've effectively received your emancipation from your parents. You're now an adult. It so just happens that between 18 and 22, if you are in college, it's usually perfectly fine to date people your age. So a young man can find himself dating a woman who is a 9 or a 10 of the same age. And she doesn't see that as a problem, because at that stage, the woman has not necessarily come into the awareness of the value of her beauty, her youth, and therefore she's wasting what she has and she's giving out for free. So take advantage of that. Date women who are between 18 and 22, if you are within that age group that I've referred to, 18 to 35. But the younger you are, if you are in college, date women in college. From 23 upwards, you should avoid women who are between 23 and 27, preferably between 23 and 30. The reason being is from 23 there is an awakening that takes place for most women. They've graduated and suddenly they start becoming more empowered, and now they recognize they have what most men want, which is beauty, youth, attractiveness, and so they begin the process of trading in exchange for resources. And this is where, if the man is not careful, he will sacrifice, because he believes that if he promises the woman love in exchange for her youth and beauty, she will accept. But she will accept that on the basis that he remains faithful, committed to her. In other words, she becomes the center of his universe in exchange for his dreams. My recommendation is don't play that game. Date them between 18 and 22, but once you turn 23, skip all the women between 23 all the way to 30, except those who willingly make themselves available to you at no cost. Skip all of that and move to women who are 35 and above. Why? Primarily because between 23 and 35, you've graduated college. You're now focusing on your career. You should be saving as much as you can. You should be investing as regularly as you can. You should be building a nest, a financial nest, as fast as you can. And therefore, you do not want to spend money on women. Let the men who are 35 and above, who've made themselves into something good, let them spend the money on the women. Spend nothing, ideally. I've said before that you simply have to use the technology that we have been given to your advantage. Sex today is a commodity, It costs virtually nothing. Therefore, anyone who is spending money, any young man who is spending money for sex, has to be nuts. I can swipe left or swipe right in 2 or 3 minutes, and I can have someone who will take an Uber to my place at no cost to me. So the idea that you have to wine and dine someone, and you have to buy flowers and buy gifts and treat them well simply because you want to have sex, for me, it's just completely wrong. Not only do you waste money, but what I care the most about is not the money, it's the time, because time is more valuable than money. Time was your first currency that you were given, and you exchange your time for anything you want. Money is simply a derivative of your time. So I want you to spend very little time chasing tail and spend all the rest of your time investing in your dreams and your goals. The reason I say skip to 35 is simply because from 23 a woman comes into her prime in terms of awareness of what she has. She starts to play the card, recognizing that the balance of power is in her favor, and that simply means a young man will find himself competing. Let's say he's 24. He will find himself competing with men who are from 23 all the way up to 35 and above. I've often said, at 24 you cannot compete financially with a man who is 34, or a man who is 44. All things remaining equal. The reason being they've had 10 years or more to accumulate wealth, and therefore they can afford to pay for all those items that you who are still starting the journey cannot afford to. But also, they've achieved their dreams, and so they have time to date. Most of them are coming into the game with a marriage mindset. You, on the other hand, are playing the dating mindset. Now, this means you ignore all the women between 23 and 30, except those who willingly offer themselves at your service at no cost. You move to those who are 35 and above because the same women who are 24 believe that they're the hottest thing on the block. By 27, she starts to come into the awakening that she now needs to take life seriously. By 30, there is almost a wake-up call. Women generally have 12 years before their beauty starts to fade. 18 to 30. From 30, their beauty begins to fade. But more importantly, for those of them who, and this applies to most women, including women who say they do not want to be married or they do not want to have kids, 35 is geriatric pregnancy. This is when it is recommended to women who want to have children to be very careful about proceeding with the decision to get pregnant, because beyond from 36 upwards, the baby's life is at risk, the mother's life is at risk, and the longer it is delayed, the riskier it becomes. Now, this means that between 30 and 35, and most women go into a panic mode. They've wasted, for most of them, the best years of their life. They have less to exchange. Remember, the older a woman gets, the less she has of what men generally want: beauty, youth, attractiveness. So a woman who is 35, or a woman who is, say, approaching 35, becomes desperate. It's almost like if you've ever seen a dog in heat, you can almost smell it from a distance. This means the young boys should be taking advantage of the women who are 35 and above, because young boys, what you want is just tail. You just want that need met, which means you can have that need met and have the financing of those needs paid for by the woman. Why? She's 35. She has had the opportunity to achieve her dreams if she followed any of my recommendations. she has money, she has some capital. Therefore, what she's looking for is companionship. At 35, her mindset is that of marriage or settling down. At 24, your mindset is dating. But you cannot compete with someone who is 24 because a man who is 34, 44 is paying all of her bills. And you can't afford to pay or compete with the more able men. So between 18 and 22, you date women in your age group, in your college. As soon as you graduate, you skip. You accept all the freebies that come, no problem. They're welcome. But you move to 35. And between that age group, 35 and above, what you're doing is you're looking for people who can meet your need, recognizing that obviously this will not be the 9s and the 10s in beauty. This will be more mature women. However, many of them are not having their needs sexually met, and they will very willingly, happily accept younger men. As a matter of fact, younger men, you have more power, you have more game in terms of bedroom game than some of the men in their age group, 30s and 40s. I cannot compete with my 20-year-old self on any level within the area of the sexual marketplace and performance. Just too much energy back then, like a bunny, a rabbit, a battery that you just recharge and off I go. The older we get, the more we start to lose our performance. Great. And this also applies in a very fascinating way. Women who are 35 and above, certainly you are struggling to find men your age or above who will choose you, either for dating or for marriage. Therefore, you should be looking to younger boys. Date younger boys, 20, 22, 23, 24, up to 27, 28. Why? Because they have more, they can satisfy your sexual needs much more. If all you want is purely the transactional sex, they can meet that need very, very easily. And you have the upper hand. You have the resources, they have nothing. So you can dictate the terms. Now, this brings me to an interesting question that I would like to address. It has to do with body count. Now, a lot of people have their own views on the concept of body count and a woman being a slut, a woman being a village bicycle. Here is perhaps something both for men and for women. This is my view. Take it as you will. In the dating marketplace, the body count concept makes very little difference to men who are in that transactional game. We don't care about how many people you slept with. As a matter of fact, men who are 18 to 35, we want you to have a relatively well-to-do body count. The reason is simply because if we're looking to pay almost nothing for sex, we want you to be liberal enough to give it to us, to choose us as a sexual partner. The idea that you would choose us, for us, is great. And that means the lower the body count you have, the more you might be conservative about who you give your body to. Whereas the more liberal you are, which has to do also with having a high body count, that means we have a shot, we have the opportunity. The same principle applies if you're dating women who are 35 and above. It makes no difference. If you are in the dating marketplace, the body count makes no difference. We want you to be sluts. We want you to be the village bicycle. Why? Simply because we, by default, means we will get some from you. We're not looking for a relationship with you. We're not looking to have a permanent girlfriend. We're simply looking for a need to be met. So, we'll give you 2 thumbs up if you are sexually active. However, in the relationship marketplace, specifically the marriage marketplace, certainly your body count matters. Now, this is where women unfortunately, in my opinion, I think society stigmatizes women wrongly, because a man who is sexually active and who sleeps around is called a player. And if he does that between 18 and 35, at 35 he has a lot of practice. He's really proficient in the bedroom. We call him a stud. A woman who has played the same game is called a slut. I disagree with that. I think women should be allowed to be as liberated as they want. And in many ways, this has to do more so with the fact that most women are raised to keep in mind that the ultimate prize is to get married, and that there is a correlation with the number of sexual partners she has had and the ability to pair bond with a man of reasonable accolade or success, wealth, social status. And therefore women are encouraged to minimize their sexual desires and urges and their sexual needs simply because of that ultimate prize. Whereas men are encouraged from a young age to delay marriage. And marriage is not something that works well for them, because it means they'll become monogamous and have fewer sexual partners. So what you then find is an interesting dilemma whereby women generally are condemned if they have many sexual partners, and men are almost lauded if they have many sexual partners. In the dating marketplace, my view is, in the dating marketplace, both sexes are equal. Young men and men who just want to date, we do not care about your body count. The higher the body count is, the better for us. It means we'll get laid, we'll get sex from you. However, as a man transitions into the marriage marketplace, we certainly take into account your body count. Now, there is nothing, it's not like there is a device that we use and we put it against your body and we see, well, you slept with 250 men or you slept with 2 men. No. It goes back to what I said before in the prior session. Those who really love sex usually have lousy marriages because they've had too many sexual partners, and they've gone past the threshold of what would have been considered normal, and therefore in a one-person relationship, recognizing that they lived a life of multiple partners, it becomes very hard for one person to satisfy them. And unfortunately, that leads to people looking outside of what is a union for that need to be met. And therefore, a woman should understand, be as free as you want, but understand how to balance the pursuit of your sexual desires, and for those of you who want to be married, balance that with the ability to still attract a man of means, a man of a certain status, an intelligent person, at the right time. And I think it has more to do with the timing in terms of the age at which you exit the dating marketplace and you enter the relationship marketplace. It has more to do with that than your body count. So for example, a young girl between age 18 and 22 may have had 100 sexual partners. But if she enters the marriage marketplace at 23, she still has youth, she still has beauty, providing she hasn't had kids, she's still attractive in the marketplace for marriage. Whereas a woman who plays the same game, 200 partners, but exits the dating marketplace at 35, she's had the same body count, but there is a big difference. The desirability in the eyes of men is much less, primarily because as a woman ages, she has less of what most men want: beauty, youth, a good womb, attractiveness. Women have less of that. Now, here is something interesting that I would hope that some women might be thinking about as I speak. and that is that a lot of the advice that I'm providing today is not correct. Some women have said to me, I'm looking for a good man. My experience has been that up until about age 29 or 30, most women are more attracted to the men who have a bad boy image, men who treat them in a way that suggests that the men are not emotionally available. They are attracted to men who are evasive, emotionally unavailable, unreliable, men who have other priorities, men who put them third or fourth in their priorities. For some reason, when I was younger, and even up until about 35, 36, I found that women who were below 29 went crazy for men in that category. For some reason, once a woman gets to about 30, there's almost an awakening process that takes place. She recognizes she has 5 years to geriatric pregnancy. In other words, she wakes up to the realization that at 30, most of her value in terms of beauty is gone. It's down a downward trajectory. It's like a slope. For some people, the gradient of the slope is slightly steep. For some people, it's very steep. So at 30, women generally, from my experience and my interaction with women and conversations with men and general observation across society, a woman wants a gentleman after she turns 30 or just as she's about to turn 30. I tend to find that 27, 28 is usually the point where the woman starts to wake up into the realization that time is of the essence. But from 30, there's almost a need for a different type of man. A woman starts to biologically say, no, I want something that is more stable, something that is more reliable, someone who's a gentleman, someone who can be a father, someone who can be a good husband. Whereas before 30, before 29, she wanted the playboy, the excitement, the fun, someone who could have a good time with her. It's almost like a shift that takes place. Now, what this simply means is that as a young man between 18 and 35, you should be living up to that. You should be living down to that expectation of the woman until she gets to that point where she says, I want something different. This is partly why, even amongst my friends, people I knew early days, the ones who were gentlemen, amazing men and very loving and very kind, bought flowers, they were treated so poorly by women. The ones who were the playboys, the bad boys, very busy, they didn't have time for women, were emotionally unavailable, they were lauded by women. It was a strange observation. I fell into the latter category and I couldn't understand it, but I was happy to accept that nonetheless. Now here's an interesting observation. I never bought flowers for any woman until I turned about 36, 37. So between 18 and 36, I never bought flowers for any woman. Never bought flowers. No roses, no flowers. And the reason was simply because my focus was my dream, my goals. I never wanted to give the impression of something that was incongruent with my behavior. I never wanted to give the impression that I was in love, because I wasn't. I didn't want to give the impression that I was ready to settle down. Now, I had so many people say, you never bought me flowers. And my response was, I'm never going to buy you flowers. It's very that simple. And interestingly, this is something that's rather sick, in my opinion. The more I behaved more like a jerk, the more I behaved emotionally unavailable, the more they loved it. Strange. I wasn't withholding flowers or romance because I was I had it within myself to give, but I refused. I didn't buy flowers because I didn't believe it was necessary. I wasn't emotionally unavailable. I wasn't signaling something that was false. I bought flowers for one person, and only one person. And that was after I reached the point in my life when I said, yeah, I think I'm ready to settle down. So I've only bought flowers or roses for one woman in my entire life. Strange. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, for young men between 18 and 35, you should not be dating. You should simply have booty calls and have a few on rotation if you want to, but focus on your dreams, focus on yourself. Apply the principle of parsimony. Stop wasting your resources on women. Interestingly, women would disagree with this perspective. However, I usually ask those who disagree with me to think about my recommendation from the perspective of what they would have wanted for their brothers, what they would have wanted for their sons. And the reason I give this recommendation is simply because between 18 and 35, 18 long years, in my experience and across society, the more I look, what I have found in the UK today, the average age for men for marriage is 35, between 35 and 36. Now that corresponds perfectly with my recommendation, which simply means between 18 and 35, after 18 years of dating around and wasting your resources, most of the relationships amount to nothing, all wasted. My view is save, invest all that resources, because at some point in the future, you will meet the right woman for you. She should inherit all of those savings that you've accrued over time. If you ask me, people I dated 10 years ago, where I went to for lunch, for dinner, how much I spent, I can't remember the experience. So 18 years of wasted resources, wasted time, wasted resources, everything flushed down the drain. So don't spend, invest. Now, let me bring today's session to a close by very briefly talking about the intersection whereby the dating marketplace meets the relationship or the marriage marketplace. I have, in the prior sessions, I have gone through what I call the value of a woman. And I break it down into 4 different measuring criteria. I'd like to share 4 of those. And I'd like to share 4 of those with the perspective of trying to explain which of those criteria matters the most in both marketplaces. The first is the sexual marketplace value. This has to do with beauty, how attractive you are. Men, we are visual. When we date, the purpose of dating is to have sex. So we think about the visual first. What do you look like in clothes? And what do you look like naked? The second is what I call your reproductive fertility value, your RFV. This applies to women who at some point in the future would like to be mothers or would like to have a family. And this simply means your ability to bring forth life, healthy life. There's a cap on this because at 35 and above, or I should say at the end of 35, from 36 you have geriatric high-risk pregnancy. Therefore, the younger you are, the more eggs you have as a woman, and the better the quantity of eggs you have. That is your RFV. The first, your SMV, your sexual marketplace value. The second, your RFV, your reproductive fertility value. The third is your what I call your non-sexual marketplace value. And this applies to attitude, behavior, training, mannerisms, whether you have been trained as a traditional woman, whether you understand the gender roles properly, your etiquette, your decorum, how you carry yourself as a woman, how you sit, how you stand, your ability to communicate with a man, your ability to inspire a man. Is your voice soothing, or does your voice sound like all of that? When you combine all of that, we call that your non-sexual marketplace value. And then finally is what I call your EIV, which is your economic intrinsic value. Now, this has to do with your human capital, education, intelligence, ability to work, whether you have a career, how much you make, how much wealth you've accumulated. Primarily has to do with resources. Men generally do not care about the fourth. We judge women based on the three: your SMV, your RFV, your NSMV. However, in the two marketplaces, the dating marketplace, all that matters to men is your sexual marketplace value, your attractiveness, how beautiful you are. Men don't really care about your ability to reproduce, because we do not want to have kids between 18 and 35. All we want to have is sex. Therefore, we're thinking about whether we find you attractive. Secondly, your non-sexual marketplace value, we don't care about that. We don't care whether you're a bitch, whether you have bad manners. We don't care whether you have an attitude problem. Preferably, we want to have sex with you, and we want you to leave. We're not looking to have you around for long. We're not looking to build intelligent conversations with you. We're not taking you before our friends. We're not taking you to see our mothers. We're not taking you on dates. We hope to avoid having a date. If we can actually take you from wherever we meet you straight to bed, we see that as a bonus. Ideally, we do not want to take you to a restaurant for a date. We might entertain having drinks with you. So the point being, a woman who has a loose mouth, a woman who doesn't believe in gender roles, a woman who likes to argue, a woman who perhaps is loud, we don't necessarily care, providing we can have you and see you naked. We have no intentions of being outside with you publicly, so we can tolerate your poor behavior for sex. Men will go to a very, 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 very inordinate and extreme length for ejaculation, for sex. We want to have sex with the most attractive women that we can. And we will tolerate so much. Poor behavior, great. She's a bit of a slut, no problem. We just want to get laid. We just want to have sex. So in the relationship, in the dating marketplace, all that matters is your sexual marketplace value, how attractive you are. And in your sexual marketplace value, we talk about things such as your physique, the length of your hair, your height to waist ratio, the size of your boobs, the size of your bum. We look at things generally that we, society-wise, have come to agree as the attributes someone would have to be able to objectively say that someone is attractive. So irrespective of age, if you are attractive, that's all that matters, which is why I said 18 to 22, if you're in that age group, date women within your age group. From 23, skip, go to 35 and above, because you're simply looking for sex and pay as little as possible. However, as you transition into the marriage marketplace, the criteria changes. In addition to your sexual marketplace, your reproductive fertility value comes into question, and also your non-sexual marketplace value comes into question, because men are now transitioning into choosing wives or partners or people they can live with or people they can cohabit with. And therefore, in addition to being attractive, if we want kids, we want to make sure that you have the ability to reproduce. So a woman who is 40 will be considered to have a very, very low or no reproductive fertility value, because anything that comes forth from that woman is down to luck. The risk is just too high. Similarly, men pay a lot of attention to your non-sexual marketplace value. Your attitude matters for most men who want to have families. Your attitude starts to matter much more than your beauty. A man does not choose a woman who turns him on. He chooses a woman who doesn't turn him off. There are so many women who are very attractive, but you cannot be around them for more than the sexual encounter. A man will settle for a less attractive woman who gives him peace. Now I talk about things men want: sex, serenity, and solitude. Solitude, serenity fall within NSMV, your non-sexual marketplace value. Now I hope that's been useful. Now I said at the start that I would talk about the tenets. Let me conclude today's session with the tenets. Obviously, I am speaking to men. I will make an exception because I believe my tenets apply to both sexes with some subtle adjustments. So allow me to run through some of the tenets for men first. Number one, between 18 and 35, you should spend 95% of your time on your dreams, your goals, becoming financially independent, becoming wealthy, becoming a professional, developing your skills, attaining a level of mastery in your field, in your area of passion. This simply means, in order for you to do that, number two, do not get married before age 35. You can start to consider marriage from age 30. 18 to 23, 22 really, is college age, your college years. 23, you need 10,000 hours for you to become a master, to have some mastery in some area of expertise or profession. 10,000 hours, assuming 2,000 working hours every single year, is 5 years. So from 23, you need 5 years to become proficient. However, most men, we squiggle as we go through life. We never go direct. We make mistakes. So I allow for a margin of safety of 20%. And I say that 5 years becomes 6 years. That takes you from 23 to 29. Therefore, at 29, you're starting to come into yourself professionally. I give you an extra year to solidify whatever your aspirations may have been. Now, I recognize that extra year sometimes is necessary for most young men just as they graduate from college. Some people want to travel, or some people want to travel at 29. When they've achieved something, they say, I'd like to take out some time for myself. That takes you from 23 to 30. At 30, you have acquired enough worldly and professional knowledge for you to be self-sufficient. You become a master in an area of your craft. However, you have been apprenticing under someone else, which is necessary, and you have not started to explore your purpose, your passions, your failures. So 30 to 35 is what I dedicate for failure. Go around the garden, go into the wilderness if you want to, and chase rabbits if you choose to, but you have 5 years to fail. Start a business, pursue a calling, a passion, build wealth, buy things, sell things. That allows you time to fail before the family arrives. At 35, you've then had the security of a profession under you, something you can always fall back to, but you've had 5 years to pivot and to try new things. Assuming you were successful, at 35, you started a business, you bought a few investment assets, you have a foundation for the family. At that point, you can choose to, if you want to get married, or you can choose to remain single. Number 3, do not have any children before age 35. A baby will ruin your dreams. Do not move in with a woman until age 35. Do not have a woman move into yours until age 35. Do not date single mothers. The reason being, someone else has made a mistake. Do not clean up under someone else's after someone else's mistakes have been made. Single mothers are great people. You will always come fourth. Her kids will come first. Her dreams will come second. She will come third. You will come fourth. As a man, you should always come first in a relationship. Focus on yourself. The kids will never see you as a father. You would have to deal with the baggage of the other father. The children will mature and grow up to say, well, you're not my father. Don't pay that price before age 35. Now from 35, if you choose to, we all get to drink our poisons, so you can choose whatever poison you want. But before 35, avoid it. Avoid owning pets. Avoid dating people who have pets.